Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, well, strap yourselves in because today we're going to explore the chilling story of Edward Pickman Derby.
Ooh, that's a good one. Lots of twists and turns there.
And the only window we have into this whole thing is a long, rambling statement given by Derby's closest friend, the guy named Daniel Upton.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure.
Oh,
Almost reads like a confession or maybe even a desperate plea for someone to believe him, you know?
yeah, it's definitely intense. Upton actually claims that he ended up shooting Derby, his best friend, but insists it wasn't murder.
Right, and then he goes on to talk about black magic and stolen bodies. He even hints at these creatures that exist, as he puts it, beyond life's edge.
So the big question is, how reliable is Upton as a narrator? And what really happened to Edward Derby? That's what we're going to untangle today.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, I think we have to start with Edward Derby himself. Upton describes him as brilliant but incredibly sheltered, almost like a child prodigy who never quite grew up.
Yeah, he was this acclaimed poet, wrote all this dark, macabre stuff, but he was still deeply dependent on his parents, even as an adult.
It's almost like his emotional development got stuck, even as his intellect just soared. Do you think that kind of vulnerability played a role in his fate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that lack of independence, that need to lean on someone stronger, it could definitely make someone susceptible to manipulation.
Which brings us to Iseneth Waite. She's introduced as this mysterious, almost sinister figure right from the start.
Right, and she's not just some random woman. She's from Innsmouth, which, if you know your Lovecraft, already sets off alarm bells.
For those who don't know, Innsmouth is this shadowy, isolated town with a seriously disturbing history, shrouded in rumors of dark cults and strange, well, beings.
Exactly. And isn't its own family history is pretty messed up. Her father, Ephraim Waite, was a notorious occultist.
Talk about a bad apple.
Yeah.
So she's got the creepy hometown and the even creepier family legacy. But she wasn't just some recluse hiding in the shadows, right?
No, not at all. She was actually quite striking, and people found her, well, unsettling. Even as a schoolgirl, there are these stories about her. She had this strange aura and these unusual talents, like she could hypnotize her classmates.
Hold on. Hypnotize them? What do you mean?
Yeah, it's described as this feeling of being pulled into her, like they were inhabiting her body and looking back at themselves.
Okay, that's just creepy. And this was just as a kid. What kind of magic are we even talking about here?
It sounds like a form of soul transference, projecting your consciousness into another being. But even at that age, the level of control she seemed to have was, well, it's highly unusual.
That's an understatement. So we've got Derby, this sheltered genius, meeting Eseneth, this woman with a seriously dark past and some pretty freaky abilities. What could possibly go wrong, right?
Well, you can probably guess. Their romance, if you can even call it that, takes a dark turn pretty quickly. Derby's friends, especially Upton, start noticing these disturbing changes in him.
Like what? How did he change?
He starts acting erratically, talking about these forced trips he's taking with Asenath to participate in occult rituals.
Forced trips. That doesn't sound like a loving relationship.
No, it doesn't. And it gets worse. Derby starts describing these terrifying experiences he's having during these rituals, like journeys to Cyclopean ruins, trips through time and space even. He talks about these horrific exchanges of personality, like they're swapping bodies to explore these forbidden realms.
And this is where things start to get really Lovecraftian, right? We're talking about those cosmic horrors that Lovecraft was so famous for.
Exactly. He starts using terms like Shoggoths and Shub-Niggurath.
Now, for those listening who might not be familiar with the finer points of Lovecraftian lore, can you give us a quick rundown of what those terms actually mean?
Sure. Shoggoths, for example, are these shapeless, monstrous beings. They represent this ultimate horror of formless chaos. And Shub-Niggurath is like this, well, she's an entity associated with fertility and these dark primal forces.
So, not exactly your average romantic getaway. Did Derby ever explain why they were doing these rituals? What was the point of all this cosmic tourism?
Well, according to Derby, Asenetha was obsessed with obtaining these bizarre objects, things that defied the laws of physics and geometry. He claimed these objects were from outside, and Aseneth knew how to get them.
Okay, hold up. You said these trips were forced. Did Derby actually say that Aseneth was making him do these things against his will?
That's what he's suggesting, yeah. And the changes in him, they become even more pronounced. Physically and mentally, he starts to resemble Aseneth, even her creepy father. It's like she's slowly absorbing his identity, bit by bit.
So it wasn't just his mind that was being warped by these experiences, but his body was actually changing too.
Right, and his personality. Derby was always timid and reserved, but he starts becoming more confident, even aggressive. It was totally out of character.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
There's actually this one scene described where a friend of theirs sees a figure in an upstairs window at the Crown and Shield house where Asenath and Derby were staying.
Oh yeah, the one where the figure has Asenath's face, but the look in her eyes is pure Edward Derby.
Yeah,
Was
like
it-
this lost, hopeless expression. So it's like their identities were blurring, becoming intertwined in this horrifying way.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, if Asenath was forcing him to do all this, why didn't he just leave? Just get away from her?
That's the million-dollar question, and it gets to the heart of what makes this whole case so unsettling. It seems Derby was caught in this web of manipulation, maybe even some kind of magical control. He was terrified of Asenath, but he was also drawn to her power.
It's like a toxic, dangerous relationship, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly.
So we've got Derby, this brilliant but vulnerable guy, caught in the clutches of Asenath, this mysterious woman with terrifying abilities and a connection to these seriously dark forces. This is definitely a recipe for disaster.
No kidding.
What happens next? How does this all start to unravel?
Well, things escalate when Upton gets a telegram from Maine. Derby has been found wandering in the woods, completely out of his mind, ranting about these otherworldly experiences. And that's where things get really interesting. So Upton rushes up to Maine, right? Word sick about his friend. He finds Derby in this remote town, just totally out of it, raving, disoriented. It's obvious something is deeply wrong.
That's a scary situation to walk into. What was going through Derby's mind at that point?
He's babbling about these terrifying things, otherworldly experiences, stuff that sounds straight out of Lovecraft. He even mentions the pit of the Shoggoths, those shapeless monsters we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and then there's Shub-Niggurath, that cosmic entity, right?
Oh yeah, he mentions her too. It's like whatever he was exposed to, it just completely shattered his sanity.
It really does. And then what? Does he start to make sense of any of it?
Well, that's when he drops this bombshell on Upton. He claims that Asenath is forcing him to participate in these horrific rituals, that she's somehow stealing his body and using it to travel to these nightmarish places.
Wait, hold on. Stealing his body? Like, how?
He describes it as being trapped in her body back at the house, while his own is being used as a vehicle for her dark explorations.
Okay, so this isn't just about creepy rituals anymore. We're talking about a complete violation of someone's being, their very identity.
Exactly. And Derby is terrified. He's convinced that she's getting stronger, able to hold on to him for longer and longer. He thinks eventually she'll just take over completely.
So he'd be trapped in her body permanently while she's running around in his.
That's what he believes. He even starts hinting that Asenath might not be what she seems. Like there's something even more sinister lurking behind those unsettling eyes.
It almost sounds like he suspects something else is controlling her, like some other entity pulling the strings. But could this actually be happening? Could someone really steal another person's body like that?
It's impossible to say for sure. But remember, we're dealing with the world of the occult here, where the laws of reality don't really apply.
Right, right. Okay, so what happens next? Do they go back to the house to confront Asenath?
No. Actually, as Derby is explaining all this to Upton, something truly horrifying happens right there in the car.
What? In broad daylight?
Yeah. Upton describes witnessing this physical and mental transformation in Derby as if he's being possessed right before his eyes. He says it was so disturbing he almost lost control of the car.
Wow, that's intense. And then what? Does Doobie snap out of it?
He does. But when he speaks again, his voice is different, deeper, more confident. But there's something, alien about it. Cold and calculating.
So whoever was driving the car before, they're just gone. Like something else is in control now.
It seems that way. And then Derby does something totally unexpected. He takes the wheel.
Wait, he's driving Derby, the guy who was always so passive?
Yep. And he's driving Upton's car with this, unsettling level of skill, like he's been doing it for years.
That's a powerful image. It really shows how Derby's not himself anymore. Something else has taken over. So what happens next? Does he drive them back to the house?
No. He disappears for a while, then resurfaces, claiming Asenath has left him.
Just like that.
Yeah. He says he made her promise to stop preying on him, that she's gone to New York and he's moving back to his family home.
So he's trying to convince everyone, maybe even himself, that he's finally free.
It appears that way. But then these unsettling rumors start circulating, whispers of strange sobbing coming from the Crown and Shield house.
Oh, man. Not the sobbing again. I bet it wasn't just any sobbing, right?
You got it. Sometimes it's in a man's voice, sometimes in a woman's.
Okay, that's just creepy. It definitely sounds like whatever was going on with Derby, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.
You're telling me. And the truth, as we're about to find out, is far more complex and far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined.
So last we heard, Derby's claiming he's free from SNET, but those creepy sobbing sounds coming from the Crown and Shield house, well, they kind of suggest otherwise. What happens next?
Well, Upton's freaking out, right? I mean, he knows Derby's not in his right mind, and whatever happened between him and Asenath, it's not over. He's caught in this awful dilemma.
Yeah, I can't imagine. What do you even do in that situation?
Right. Like, do you try and warn the authorities knowing they'll probably think you're crazy?
Mhm.
Or do you try and handle it yourself, which could be incredibly dangerous?
What a horrible position to be in, to know your friend's in danger but feel totally powerless.
Totally. And then things get even darker. In the middle of the night, Upton gets this phone call from the Crown and Shield house.
Oh, man.
And he hears these strange sounds on the other end, like liquidy sounds, almost like someone trying to speak, but they can't form words.
Ugh, that's terrifying. Do you think it was Derby trying to reach out somehow?
It's possible. Remember, Derby was a writer. Words were his thing, To hear him reduced to these, guttural sounds, it suggests he was in a really bad way.
Trapped somewhere, unable to speak. Yeah, I get it. So Upton gets this creepy phone call, and then what?
Well, just hours later, someone shows up in his door.
Yeah.
In the dead of night, ringing the bell in Derby's old familiar pattern.
Goosebumps. That must have been a heart-stopping moment.
Totally. For a second, Upton thinks, could it be Derby? Somehow free. But then he opens the door. It's this grotesque, dwarfish figure, draped in Derby's clothes. And this stench, this unimaginable stench, it's like something straight out of a nightmare.
Oh, God. So it wasn't Derby.
No. Whatever it was barely able to move. But it manages to shove this note into Upton's hand before collapsing.
What did the note say?
It was from Derby, written in his own hand. A desperate plea, from beyond the grave.
What? Beyond the grave? What do you mean?
Derby reveals that he killed Asenath months ago, buried her body in this cellar to try and stop her from possessing it.
He thought it was over, but it was just the beginning.
Right. Asenath, or rather Ephraim's consciousness trapped in her decaying body, managed to escape. She took over Derby's body at the sanitarium.
So Derby's soul was trapped in her rotting corpse.
Exactly. And the note, it's this desperate plea for help. Derby's begging Upton to kill the entity that's stolen his life, to destroy it before it's too late.
He's basically warning him about the danger of these ancient powers, right? The things man was not meant to know.
Yeah. And then the messenger, it just collapses. Its body literally dissolves into this puddle of, I don't even know how to describe it, this liquescent horror.
Like it was never even alive.
Yeah. Like just a temporary vessel animated by Derby's will, his last act of defiance.
Oh, man. That's heavy. So Upton's left with this impossible choice, right?
Apparently. Honor his friend's last wish, even if it means taking a life.
There are no good options here.
Nope. But in the end, Upton decides to act. He goes to the asylum and kills the thing wearing Derby's face.
That's dark.
It's an act of mercy, in a way, a tasted kind of redemption.
Twisted is right. And even then, the horror doesn't end, right?
Right. Upton insists on cremation. He has to make sure Ephraim's spirit is completely destroyed, wiped out.
He's scared Ephraim might still be out there, somewhere.
Yeah, looking for a new host. A new victim.
That's terrifying. So Upton ends his statement with this chilling warning. Keep clear of black magic. It's the devil's business.
It's like a message board of trauma, a warning to anyone who might be tempted to mess with the occult.
Man, what a story. What can we even take away from all of this?
I think it's a reminder, that there are forces out there we just don't understand. Things we mess with at our own peril.
Right. We think we're in control, but Derby's story shows just how fragile that control can be.
And how vulnerable we are to these forces beyond our comprehension, beyond logic and reason.
And it's a reminder that identity itself, something we take for granted, can be manipulated, stolen, replaced.
It makes you wonder, in a world where bodies and souls can be exchanged, can anyone truly be sure of who they are?
That's a question we're all left to ponder. The case of Edward Derby is a descent into cosmic horror. A reminder that sometimes the things we fear the most aren't the monsters in the shadows, but the darkness within ourselves.
Well said.
Thanks for joining me for another deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, but be careful what you see.